Welcome to the Freedom Principle Missouri podcast, Show Me Conversations. I'm Byron Keelan, president of the Freedom Principle Missouri, and joining me tonight as co-host is Oscar Harold of Show Me Sentinel. Oscar, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Oscar Harold with Show Me Sentinel. You can find me on X and Facebook and Show Me Sentinel.
Great. And our special guest tonight, I really appreciate it, is somebody who we really enjoy working with in the state capitol, and that is State Senator Ben Brown. Ben, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about you, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, I am State Senator Ben Brown from the 26th District. That includes Franklin, Warren, Gasconade, Osage counties, as well as the city of Eureka and St. Louis County. And I want to thank you guys for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming on. I know you're in the middle of just, after a busy week of session, the last thing you want to do is hang around. So I really appreciate the fact that you're hanging around a Thursday afternoon here with us. But there's several bills that you're talking or that you're sponsoring that I think have a real major impact on Missouri. It's going to have a really major impact on Missouri. One is SJR 31, which is the state income tax. And then the other two are dealing with our elections, and that is SB 62 and SB 152, I believe, on elections. And so tonight, I just wanted to touch base with you on those three as they're moving through the Senate here. But first off, let's talk about SJR 31, since that seems to be probably what more and more people are interested about, and that's eliminating the state income tax. Why don't you give us an overview of what SJR 31 is and does, and then I've got some questions here that I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, sure thing. For my first 2 years in the legislature, one thing that's been frustrating is just for a state that has a Republican supermajority in the House and Senate, we really have fallen short, in my opinion, when it comes to accomplishing some of these big conservative goals. You see states like Florida, Tennessee, Texas, even the state of Washington. The fact that they're ahead of us when it comes to tax policy is it's just very disheartening. And so when I started really digging into this and studying, I started looking at growth trends among states. We don't haven't had a census since 2020. It's only every 10 years, but there are other metrics you can use to track growth, maybe not exact numbers, but you can track overall growth, population migration trends. And one of these resources that historically has been, pretty spot on when it comes to tracking overall trends is the U-Haul Growth Index. So U-Haul's company operates in all 50 states, and so they put out an annual report showing trends of where people are leaving and where they're moving to. And so when I started going through this, the things that stood out to me right off the bat, it ranks all 50 states in order from most population gain to most population loss. Out of the top 5 states on that list, as far as population gain, 3 of the top 5 have a 0% income tax. Now, if you expand that a little further, you can see that 4 of the top 7 have a 0% income tax. And I didn't want to stop there because Missouri, we're coming off a decade of the slowest rate of population growth in our state's history. That's a big problem in a lot of ways. So I want to compare us with just our bordering states, because those are the ones that we are really directly in competition with when it comes to attracting population. So Missouri, we're bordered by 8 states. And when I ranked those states in order of population growth, Missouri came in 6th place. So kind of towards the bottom. When I ranked those states and plugged in income tax rates, coincidentally, or maybe not so much, Missouri also was in 6th place in terms of lowest income tax rate. And, there's the old saying, correlation does not necessarily mean causality. So I wanted to look a little more closely. Out of the 6 states that are ahead of us in terms of population growth, all 6 happen to be the same 6 that have a lower income tax rate than the state of Missouri. The 3 that are lagging behind us in terms of population growth or loss just so happen to also be the 3 states that have a higher income tax rate than us. So though correlation doesn't necessarily automatically mean causality, I mean, at some point, the correlation and just between the two, it's just really undeniable.
Yeah, And so you guys are offering, you're sponsoring SJR 31, which is it got passed out of committee last week. It actually got passed out of your committee last week. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And you guys, from what I'm gathering, you guys did a whole redraft. Did you guys do a whole redraft of this bill, or did you just make some significant, some changes to it?
It had some significant changes, and with a policy with implications that span this far and that is this large, it's not the kind of thing you can file it once and be done. It's going to be a continual evolution, and I'm determined. I'm not going to continue advancing it past the committee level until we have it exactly right. I want to make sure that we have a product that is going to be overwhelmingly a huge net positive for the people of the state. So I'm not in there to just try to rush something through as quick as possible for credit or anything like that. I'm only going to bring forth the policy and pursue it all the way there if we have it right. And so that's why we had some of the changes in the committee sub that we offered.
Okay, so the committee sub is the current version that you guys are working from?
Yes. I mean, there are a lot of people involved. I've been working with people that have worked on similar policies in other states, talking to other legislators, economists, and so many other people. This was something that actually Governor Kehoe mentioned as one of his priorities on the campaign trail, and he's really shown a real interest in it. And so a lot of people involved, a lot of great ideas, and there's really been different paths we can take. If you want to implement something like this as quickly as possible, which in the current version of the bill that passed out of committee, it would be implemented in 2027, would be just a complete elimination of the income tax. Then in those scenarios, you have to at least initially have a little bit of an offset. And so if you're completely eliminating like a huge portion of general revenue, initially at least you might have to make that up somewhere else. Versus if you want to rely solely on growth, because there are two different things you can utilize to bring down the income tax rate. You can do it through growth. You can do it through offsetting it. I don't want to rely completely on either one of those factors. I don't want to have a plan where people are waiting a couple decades before it's phased out. At the same time, want to make sure we're not just doing a trade-off or some kind of bait and switch where they're paying less taxes in one area and paying more taxes somewhere else.
Right. No, I agree with that. That's a good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Oscar.
Yeah, Senator Brown, do you think that this could cause an increase in sales tax potentially, even at the locale, at like say St. Louis City and the municipalities?
So it couldn't do that. The reason why is if you look at in the current the bill as currently drafted, the mechanism that would allow us to utilize sales tax, it would allow us to eliminate an exemption on certain kinds of sales tax, which was an effort that was spearheaded by the Realtors Association, I believe back in 2014. And so that prohibited sales tax on certain services. All this is doing is in that portion that was put in our Constitution, all it would do is it would remove the term state. So it has the prohibition on any new state and local sales taxes on services. It just removes the word state, but the prohibition on any kind of local taxes would still remain intact. So it would prevent that from occurring. There's been concern about, if this is expanding in the service tax, what does that mean if if you go to take your car in the mechanic, your sales tax right now on the parts, but not on the labor portion, or if you go to get your hair cut or any other of the thousands of different services that are out there. And the way I put it, this bill or resolution that approved by the voters, it would apply growth to buy down our sales tax rate all the way down to 4%. And then at that point, it would constitutionally cap it there. So our state sales tax could never grow above 4% again without another change to our Constitution. Right now, it's a little over 4.2%. So the end result is actually going to be a lower sales tax rate. And so, I always throw out the example to people that show a little anxiety, not really sure of like what this means in terms of the overall financial picture for them. And I say like, well, what percentage of your paycheck do you think you spend on services? And, they'll start thinking about it and be like, well, I have rent or mortgage, I have gas, I have food, things like that all would not be impacted because, the services that this would be applicable to. And then out of what's left over, how much are you actually spending on services? And it seems like usually like I get 5% or below. And so you think about that, if you're being taxed 4% more on 5% of your income, that equates to a 0.02% increase in expenses to you. So yeah, you might have a 0.02% increase to your personal expenses, but meanwhile your paycheck's going up 4.8% because that's the rate of income tax in Missouri. So your income's going up 4.8%. Your expenses are only going up 0.02%. And I'll even throw out like the more extreme, kind of ludicrous example, like just say it was possible for you not to have to spend a single dollar on anything but services. Every last penny went to services. You didn't have to buy gas by some miracle. You didn't have to buy food. You didn't have rent. You didn't have mortgage. Every dollar went towards services, and that's it. Still, even in that case, this absurd scenario, your expenses go up 4%, your income goes up 4.8%. So even in the most extreme examples, you're still coming out as a net positive.
Yeah. How about a thanks for that one. How about a fun one and talking about the strategic golden reserve? Yeah, excuse me, the strategic gold and silver reserve fund.
Yeah. So one thing this does, I neglected to mention, one of the very important parts of this bill is that it caps our spending, which is something that's been desperately needed for a very long time. You've seen our budget, I believe it's more than doubled in the last 10 years. And I don't know about you guys, I don't feel like I'm getting twice the value from my government. But you wonder where that's all going.
Well,
and so this...
Quite comparable to Illinois, in fact.
Well, it's even worse, actually.
Yeah. Talking about dollars per person, I think we are behind. And that's saying
I do
a lot.
like the fact that you guys are tying the growth of government to the population. And we'll get back to the gold and silver thing here in a second. I like the fact that even if when we eliminate the state income tax and have a economic boom of population, you're still only going to grow government at 1% based on what I'm reading. Is that correct?
It would be either it would be 1% or no more than the rate of population. And so if we grew 2%, then the budget would be allowed to go up by 2%. And I've had some people kind of push back and say, well, that's not enough. We need to be reducing spending. And I agree 100%. But you have to look at the trajectory that we're on now. And that is not sustainable. So anything we can do, and I agree, like I'd like to see us go much further. But just to even limit it after what I've seen in my time in the legislature and what we've seen over the last 10 years plus, that would be a tremendous victory. And also, I'll point out that this doesn't account for inflation. So it's limiting us to only population growth. And, a lot of people don't think about the fact that the value of a dollar is not finite. It's always in flux. So with inflation, say we have a $50 billion budget this year, $50 billion, and we didn't grow at all. It was limited. $50 billion 10 years from now is actually less than $50 billion today. So it's kind of indirectly reducing spending by not having any provision in there that accounts for inflation. Like I said, I think this is a great first step. I think there's a lot more we need to do to rein in spending. But if you would have told me that this would have been something that's even a possibility at the end of last session after having to go through that budget my first 2 years, I would have said, that sounds amazing, but I just can't see it happening. Now we have a real opportunity to actually do this.
I was going to say,
but you guys also have a provision here that if the population decreases, that the budget would go down.
Yes. That's an important thing to point out as well. So it does allow that if for whatever reason we lost population, that would bring the budget down as well. But if we actually accomplish this and eliminate our income tax, I mean, all the data out there would indicate that that's not going to be the case. we're going to put ourselves on the map with a lot of these other states and be somewhere where people want to move to.
No, I agree with that. So, and so we'll go back to the golden so you guys are creating, as part of this, is that it creates a strategic golden and silver reserve fund. So what is that, and why are you guys putting this into the bill?
So we put these restraints in place to cap spending. We improve growth. That's going to result in us having a surplus. So the question is, what do we do with that surplus? And what this bill does in its current form is it creates two separate funds. We have a budget responsibility fund and also a tax reform fund. So the excess revenue is split in those two funds. The budget responsibility fund is there and able to be utilized in the event that we do have a shortfall, and we need to utilize those reserve funds to make sure that us as a government, that we're still able to provide essential services. The tax reform fund, I think that's the one that I think most people get excited about. The excess revenue that half that goes into that fund, it would continue to accumulate, and once this fund hits certain metrics, it would result in an automatic 0.1% reduction in our sales tax rate. So that's what I referenced earlier. It will keep kicking down our sales tax rate. Like I said, we're utilizing that growth to buy down our rate until it gets at or below 4%. Once it hits that, it's capped there forever. We'll never have a state sales tax rate that's over 4%. After that, we have the ability to shift and utilize that same process with that fund, start chipping away at our corporate income tax. So we utilize that same process. We would start bringing down our corporate rate, and if and when we get to the point where that's completely eliminated, the question is, what are we going to do now? And so the idea is to place those funds at that point into establishing a strategic gold and silver reserve. And this is something that not only is it something that a lot of people get excited about, it's just good policy. As a state, due to federal law, we can't print our own currency, but the one thing we can do is mint precious metals. And so by minting gold and silver and having that backing of our state economy in the event of some kind of disastrous economic downturn in the future, we would be strategically positioned so much better than most other states out there.
Do you know of any other state that strategic that has a zero income tax, that has a strategic gold and silver reserve fund as part of their thing?
It's something we looked into when this idea was first being floated. I think there might be one or two, but if so, I believe it's very limited on the states that have actually taken this step so far.
And do you go ahead, Oscar? Sorry,
you were still on your train of thought.
I was just going to say we've heard that this could violate the one subject rule with the constitutional amendments. How do you respond to those arguments?
So you have to look at the single subject rule for Senate bills versus constitutional amendments, and it would not violate the single subject rule because pertaining to constitutional amendments, it can't address more than one article in the Constitution. This is all only making changes in one article, so it would not be a violation. It meets muster in terms of constitutionality. Yeah, that, and I'm impressed when people point that out. The fact that they're just even conscious of that, because it seems like so many people that even I have to work with in the legislature today seem to forget about that provision when it comes to their Senate bills and constitutional amendments as well.
Okay, well, great. Go ahead, Oscar. You want to ask a question?
Yeah. So, Senator Brown, the trigger for the cap for this bill, is a byproduct of that potentially the Economic Development Committee or Missouri DOE to try to get them to do more things and to find more fraud, waste, and abuse that's occurring within the state, similar to the federal Doge. A lot of people are excited that we have a Missouri Doge. I'm not sure if there's any citizens on that review board. I could be wrong, but is there an opportunity for that? And is there any fraud, waste, and abuse that you're looking at other than lemonade stands?
Yes, I think that there's an abundance of waste, fraud, and abuse, probably, all three of those in different areas of government. The problem is that we're not going to have full transparency in where that's occurring until we as the legislature are forced to address that. We're not going to take the steps needed I'm speaking generally. Like if it was all up to me, I would love to dig into more of this. But there are 33 other members of the Senate and many more state reps, and so to get a collective effort to where people are going to start taking a serious look at this, we really have to have those constraints in place, because otherwise it's never going to happen. I mean, you look at what happens every year with the budget. The budget bills start in the House, they get sent over to the Senate, and then year after year, I see on the Senate side just billions of additional dollars being tacked in addition to that. And none of these are essential services provided by the state. I'll just say that. And so there's so much more that we could be doing to roll back some of this. As far as the role of the Missouri Doge, as of right now, there is a Missouri Senate Doge Committee and a Missouri House Doge Committee. So these are just standing committees that were created in both the Senate and the House. Now, I would love to see something that would have more collaboration to where you had some public representation in that as well. I think that would be a great step for us. And all this it's very new. It's still taking shape. So as far as how effective it's going to be, I think that is very much yet to be determined. I know that the House and Senate committees did get together and talked about putting together an online portal where any member of the public can go on and report any waste that they see. And so it's kind of like an online tip line. So you see anywhere in your government, and this is for government employees both and just the public as a whole, you can send that and the committee receives an email, and then we can take it and look into and inquire into with various government agencies to see what's going on. We can take legislative action. And so it does open some possibilities in terms of how we can address that. Like I said, I think it's too early in the development just to see what those committees will be capable of. But I do see it as a promising step that both the House and Senate independently took action to put a committee like this into place.
Yeah, we had an opportunity to talk to Lieutenant Governor yesterday when we were at Jeff City. He definitely, had said, yeah, Elon Musk is a once in a lifetime person that's able to do all these things. But one of the things that we had said was, well, he's made the path, so there's a recipe. So that recipe could potentially be replicated in, Missouri as well as other states too.
Absolutely. And that's what you're seeing all around the country in a lot of these
So,
states.
Ben, real quick, just we'll finish up on the SJR 31 here. When do you think you will have a final bill to present to the Senate, or is it, when do you think it'll be coming up for debate on the Senate floor? And then what kind of amendments are you preparing for that we'll have to either fight against, or, I'm more or less, I'm worried about Democrats trying to put in other stuff here to either poison the pill. I mean, I can remember when this first session opened, we had the governor talking about eliminating state income tax, and then Representative Ashley Owen on the House side was like, well, I'd rather that they just cut food sales tax and diaper sales tax. And I'm thinking, well, that's not really going to help people that much versus, like you said, the state income tax. So obviously the Democrats still don't get the concept that less taxes equals more in your pocket type thing. And so I'm just kind of concerned, what kind of amendments do you think they're planning to offer here?
Well, that is yet to be seen. I'm sure there'll be some things they try to tag on there. But, like I said, tax reform, when we met in our Senate, our annual Senate caucus meeting last November, tax reform was one of the top 3 priorities of the caucus as a whole. This has been named as a top priority of the governor. And the amount of engagement that he puts in, I think, will be critical as well. Because I think he goes and actually starts meeting with some of these Democrat senators and state reps. And I think that could go a long way to help mitigate any of that. But, we do have the majority, and we can vote down any amendment that's offered. It's just about making sure that the caucus as a whole has the will to be in the chamber and be there to help vote these down.
So just a quick,
as far as,
go ahead.
I was going to say, as far as when it comes up, I'm hesitant to say, give a definite timeline right now because there's a lot of variables, input from the governor's office. We are running numbers, then running them again, and then having them looked at again because there was something like this. You can't risk being off even a little bit. You need to make sure that everything is as precise as it can actually be. Senate leadership as well has a say as far as, when a bill is actually, even if after passed out of committee, it's up to the pro tem to decide when that bill gets taken in and placed on the formal calendar. And depending on how many bills are on the formal calendar, because we have to go through them in the order that they're listed, that's going to play a big part too, as far as timeline for when we'll actually have an opportunity to bring this up on the Senate floor.
I'm just curious, do you think that if this does not get done in this legislative session, do you think the governor calls a special session for this?
I wouldn't think so, because we do have another session prior to when this would actually be on the ballot. So it's not an election year, so that does buy us a little more time. Though we did see what happened with initial petition reform, where there was a little bit less sense of urgency in that first year, and thinking we would just get done in the second, and then I think you guys know how that story went, and that was not the case, unfortunately. And so whether he would have the will to call a special session if it weren't completed next session, I think, that's something that could possibly be a consideration. I personally, I couldn't see him calling a special session just to get it done this year. And I'm sure that he's probably getting advice from people that are looking at this strategically also. I think there's advantages to getting this done quickly, but also when you have, powerful groups like the realtors, that, they have one of the largest PACs, at least dollar wise, of, most of the special interests that are in the Capitol, and they're going to be the main ones funding the opposition to this. Does it benefit us to get this out quickly or give them a shorter runway? I think those are some of the different things that we need to consider as we're moving forward. And so those are all the factors being weighed right now. And there's a great deal of thought and effort that's being put into this, because just like you need to make sure all the numbers are right, you need to make sure it's going to be a net benefit for Missourians. It's going to spur the kind of economic growth that we want to see. There also is the strategic political aspect as well, because even if it passes and gets on the ballot, well, we still have to have that approved by the voters as well.
Yeah, that's true. I was just looking at obviously the realtors, like you said. It's interesting that the Society of CPAs are opposing this. I'm guessing that they're going to lose a lot of work, considering tax filings.
No one will have to file state tax returns anymore. That's what service they can sell.
But I am curious.
So I'd probably
I'm curious as to why the Associated Industries of Missouri were against this, though, because that's usually construction workers, and I would think that they would, that's a business organization. I'm not sure why. I guess they're feeling that it's a tax increase on businesses or services. Is that what they would oppose?
I don't recall. Yeah, I don't have my notes from the hearing in front of me, but I don't recall exactly what objection they raised to it. But yeah, it seems like mostly pro-business organizations have been very much in support of this, because it doesn't just help individuals. You look at small businesses, which are really the lifeblood of our economy. It's not the big corporations. It's the small mom and pop shops, small businesses. And those are the ones that will benefit the greatest from this, because corporations, they use this corporate style taxation when they file their returns. But small businesses frequently, they file as an LLC or a certain kind of corporation, or you can file what's called a flow through taxation return. And so instead of the corporation being taxed as a separate entity, it's actually the profits and losses of the small business are just added on to your own personal income. And so in those scenarios, the profits and losses on these businesses that are small enough to operate as an LLC and file their taxes that way, then their profits won't be taxed at all. But the large corporations still will, at least till we get to the point to where we lower that sales tax rate all the way down and cap it, and then move to start chipping away at the income tax. But right off the bat, small businesses are going to benefit. Really, one thing I point out when I counter the argument about the burden that having to pay sales tax on some services might have, in addition to the argument I made before, is that, I was a small business owner myself. I was a restaurant owner. And every price point I set for every menu item, for every drink that was sold, there's an equation that is used to determine what I sell a given product for. You have to look at what do you need to sell something for in order to maintain profitability. And you have to look at all the expenses that go into making that product. You got labor, you got your cost of goods sold. Like if I'm selling a cheeseburger, hamburger meat, buns, et cetera, et cetera. But the other expense is taxes. So if I have to pay 4.8% less in taxes on my profits as a restaurant owner, then that means I can also bring that price point down. And if I don't do it, my competition down the road is. And so this is a perfect example of where the free market restraints should bring down prices on their own. All too often government tries to use force to mandate a minimum wage to require, certain price caps for certain industries. But I think that if you just kind of take more of a hands-off approach, let free market forces take effect, I think that does the job better than any politician.
Yeah, I agree. So does that mean you're going to open up another restaurant?
I maybe another business model, but I think I'm probably good on the restaurants for a little while.
Well, we miss Satchmo's, that's for sure. Let's go on to your other two bills here. And I just want to say is that it's really nice that you've really sort of become the election expert or go-to person, because last year you passed SJR 78, which we've been pushing for 3 years to get passed, which banned ranked choice voting. And part of that ban on ranked choice voting also included ban of foreign investors or foreign donors or foreign governments from getting involved into ballot initiatives and things. And
the Amendment
yeah,
7,
amendments.
that was the one that did it enshrined in our Constitution that only U.S. citizens can vote. But that's the one I got. One of the ones I have this year.
Well, no, I'm saying but didn't it also prohibit foreign people from getting involved in government?
No, not on that one. That one was limited to
okay. I my bad. There were so many of them going around last year that SJR 74 and stuff. But yeah, we saw with Amendment 3 the 1630 fund, and they basically they were heavily funded by foreign billionaires, and we saw them pumping in almost $16 to $20 million to help fight and pass Amendment 3. So talk about Senate Bill 152 and banning foreign interference in our elections.
Yeah, so IP reform, when that didn't pass, that was one of the most disappointing moments of my Senate career by far. I took that very hard because there was nothing I was more dedicated to over the final month of the session than getting that across the finish line. I feel like that was the very least that we owed the people of the state, the people that sent us here to actually do things that Republicans are supposed to be in support of. And so when that failed, I was kind of crushed. I locked the door of my office and I wouldn't let anyone in for like an hour and a half. I wanted to be alone. It was just more frustrating than anything that's happened in that building since I've been there, and that's saying a lot. And so what we saw, because of our failure to pass that, is that, you had groups like the 1630 Fund that literally put millions of dollars into our state to fund the campaigns for Amendment 3 and try and abortion our Constitution, and also Proposition A that required the higher minimum wage and paid sick leave. Before the 2024 election cycle, if you look at rankings of where foreign money is going to influence their Constitution, Missouri already ranked number 6 out of all 50 states. So we were number 6 in terms of most foreign money coming in to influence our elections. After 2024, we're number 3. We have a serious problem, very serious. And so the 1630 Fund, they were the largest contributor to these liberal causes and aiming to amend our Constitution. And they are backed by a Swiss foreign billionaire by the name, and I'm probably going to butcher this, Hans-Jörg Wyss. I might have actually done okay there. I don't know. We don't care about him anyways, or how
Right.
he pronounces his name. He's over there. But he's contributed over $243 million to the 1630 fund that's then being funneled to all these states, particularly red ones, where Republicans are in charge in the legislature, to try to go around them and basically purchase amendments to our Constitution. So he's been doing this for some time. And just to give you an idea of who this guy is, stated publicly, he has absolutely zero interest in becoming an American citizen, for one. So why is he meddling with our state constitutions, you might ask? Well, in a biography that was written by his very own sister, he was quoted as saying that his personal goal was, quote unquote, to reinterpret the American Constitution in the light of progressive politics. So this is the guy we have spending over hundreds of millions of dollars, all aimed at buying amendments to our Constitution. So I filed this bill because I think that, sort of passing a few reform, I have filed again, and actually we do have a hearing on that on Monday, I'm pleased to say. But even, if that failed to make it over the finish line, I believe that getting this in our statutes could be just as effective, potentially even more, than if we were to accomplish switching over to some kind of concurrent majority type system, like myself and several other the bill sponsors have filed again this year. So, you look how close the vote was on Amendment 3, and then you subtract the millions and millions of dollars that came from this organization and others that funded these programs. There's absolutely no way it would have
So
passed.
would this bill require the 1630 fund to register its own self as a PAC, or would they still be able to give, to that group that was pushing for the Amendment 3 type, or the Proposition A was led by a local group, or, it was funded, all that money was, that's almost $4 million of George Soros money was funded for Proposition A. And so the question is are we requiring them to be separate, or how would we track the 1630 fund as to where their money's coming from?
Well, they're gone. They're cut out entirely. And any other group that's accepted money from non-U.S. citizens, it does have a cap. As initially drafted, the cap was at $100,000, but I thought that created too many loopholes that I could see being exploited. So I brought that down to 10,000. And someone asked me, why have a cap at all? So it says that you can't, any organization, if you file a committee in support or in opposition of a ballot measure, you have to provide a certification stating that no foreign donors or anyone that has accepted money from foreign donors was involved in any of the prior activity for that committee. It also has provisions, there's requirements. All these committees have to file, there's reporting requirements for the Missouri Ethics Commission. They have to do it every quarter, plus, so many days before an election, so many days after an election. So this would also require a certification or attestation that they haven't received any money from any foreign nationals as well. Any expenditures that any entity or individual makes in support or in opposition of a ballot measure, they have to make that same attestation. In addition, we have, and the version that was presented in committee, I actually have a stub already prepared because I did make some changes. I wanted to enhance the enforcement mechanism because it utilizes as presented in committee, it utilized just the procedure for MEC uses for investigating any campaign finance violation. I wanted that to be stronger because the problem is if you only go after the committee and then after the election that committee dissolves, where's the accountability? And so I'm strengthening that provision so that the directors or those that are in charge of these taxing committees, that they will be held personally liable as well. So there's no just dissolving the committee and getting off the hook and walking away and then trying it again and creating a completely different committee the next time. You will be held accountable if you violate any of these provisions.
So that that addresses the, if Byron's, well, let's just say that Swiss man, whatever his name was, gave me several $1,000,000 and then I gave it to Amendment 3, advertisement. That would essentially eliminate that from happening as well.
Absolutely. Any organization like a 1630 fund, they would be eliminated from our election process in the state of Missouri. So I think that would be a huge win. Like I said, I think that could be just as impactful. I mean, but possibly even more than some of the other IP reform bills that we have been working on. Because cutting that out, that is a huge, huge.
Right.
Then I mentioned initially it had a $100,000 cap. That was aimed at preventing. There are a couple of provisions aimed at preventing weaponization of this process to use against conservative groups, because we all know the left likes to play dirty. And now there are a few other states that have put similar policies in place, and they didn't account for this. And what you're seeing is they will actually go in and file a complaint to start an investigation, and then use that investigation knowing that there's no wrongdoing, but still that they can use that process to obtain a full list of donors that have donated to any of these political groups, ones supporting the conservative causes. So they don't just get the organizations that are supporting them. They'll manipulate the system to use it to get a full donor list. Then they'll go out, they'll publish it all online. A lot of these people have businesses, and then next thing you know, you got people outside your businesses boycotting. I know from someone that took a stand as a small business owner in an area that was a little more left-leaning, that in my position wasn't very popular. I had just a flood of people coming in and leaving one-star reviews for my restaurant. And they would say, right in a review, like, I've never been here, but Ben Brown's a horrible person, or something to that effect, 1 star. And even like when I reached out to Google and pointed that out, they wouldn't take them down. And so we don't want to create a scenario to where we're discouraging people from donating to a committee that might be aimed at fighting something like Amendment 3 or some other policy that's just as damaging. I also I had some part of this in there, but I'm going to enhance it a little bit because I want to have certain privacy protections for frivolous investigations that are spurred by this process. So if the left thinks they're going to try to abuse this to try to expose people donating to conservative causes and then just sick their people on them to go do their dirty work, I'm not going to allow that to happen either. If you're just because someone files a complaint against you, that's not enough to where you're going to be able to get all their data. If they're found, any wrongdoing is found, that's a completely different story. But we live in a country where we believe in due process, and I don't think that you should be exposed for donating to something that you believe in just because someone wants to try to play these dirty tactics and weaponize a process that's aimed at protecting your Constitution.
No, I really am glad that we're doing this. I do think, had we passed SJR 74, it would have had that for ballot initiatives. And so I think, and we just testified yesterday, both of us did, on SJR 33, and the issue, the point that was made amongst all the testimony for SJR 33 was the fact is that out-of-state groups spent over $30 million, and about half of that money came from the 1630 fund, which is which is nothing but a slush fund for out-of-state billionaires, and that is, part of the reason why we, and then our MEC didn't have any way to do this. So we're glad that you're putting some teeth into this and going to try to stop this, and that'll be great. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the other. So you're the part on Amendment 7 that did ban foreign interference or foreign non-citizens from voting, is that you're actually trying to even put some teeth behind that. And with SB 62, which would require proof of citizenship to actually register to vote. We talked about that if you go online, it just says, are you a U.S. citizen? You check the button, but there's no actual proof. When we talked to Senator Black about your bill before it actually came up for a hearing, I told him about the Tim Pool story that he broke about the Help America Vote Act. And I pointed out to him that, we sent the letter to Secretary Ashcroft back in April of last year because we were concerned about it. And just from January through March, we had 684,000 new registration inquiries through the Help America Vote Act. And of those inquiries, 48,447 had no match in the Social Security system, and almost 35,000 had their Social Security number match deceased people. And it was like, this is a huge problem here. And so I really applaud the fact that you're actually trying to require, to protect our elections. And so you want to talk a little bit about Senate Bill 62?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you set it up perfectly. I had certain areas of policy that I knew I'd want to focus on when I got to the legislature. But really, I think that election security is really one thing that's become front and center for me. SJR that ended up passing at the ballot as Amendment 7, that was one of the first bills I ever filed my first year in the legislature. And I wasn't able to get it across then, but we were able to pull it off, last year. And, big thanks to your organization as well, because you guys were some of the biggest advocates for that. And that makes a huge difference trying to move these policies that, some on the other side see as controversial. I personally see them as common sense, but any additional help is just very valuable. The voters presented us with a mandate because not only did Amendment 7 pass, it passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support. I mean, this passed by a larger margin than any other ballot measure that was on the ballot, any of the statewide candidates, and so just the overwhelming approval that really just solidified my eagerness, my motivation to continue with this momentum and go even further to protect the security of our elections. So this would require a documentary proof of citizenship when registering to vote. And one thing that really stood out to me is I had a birthday last December, and so you get the little card in the mail saying that it's time to renew your driver's license. Of course, now they're switching everything to Real ID, and so they list like a whole number of documents you have to bring in just to do that proves your citizenship, like Social Security card, birth certificate, all of that was included in the list. And so I went in and brought all these documents to get my new Real ID. Then they said, oh, if you want to verify your address for voter registration, and they say just it will come up on the screen just like if anyone were to register for the first time. And so one screen pops up, says, I am a U.S. citizen. I attest I am a U.S. citizen. Check a box with your finger on the touch screen, hit enter, and that's it. That's it. They assume that you're telling the truth. And it's very difficult to audit our voter rolls because right now, a lot of the departments, the Department of Revenue has a lot of data that could be cross-referenced against information the Secretary of State has. But at least thus far, that collaboration hasn't really been taking place.
Yeah.
And so one of the things this includes, in addition to just that requirement, it also includes some pieces that help us clean up our voter rolls as well. One example is that the circuit clerk in each county once a month will have to send a list to the Secretary of State's office, a full list of everyone in the previous month that utilized being a non-citizen as their excuse to get out of jury duty. So that's the thing that it's almost amazing that that's not something that's already been done. Like they have lists, people show up, say, I can't serve as a juror because I'm a non-citizen, but then that data goes nowhere. Like that data is being provided. We need to start utilizing what's already at our disposal to ensure that our rolls are secure.
Yeah, I know that they get the being an election judge myself. I know that they transfer the information for the people that are convicted felons to ensure that they're not put on there.
Now, I just wanted to, I appreciate this immensely because obviously, like St. Louis City, when they tried to pass their homeless bill, a rights bill last summer, one of the provisions that they wanted to do was to register homeless people to vote. And it's like, okay, we don't know how many, and they've been importing citizens from all around the world because they've been encouraging that. And it's like, how are you going to prove if they have no ID who they are and, whether or not they're a U.S. citizen or whether they're even a resident of Missouri. And so this would, I think, stop a lot of these progressive cities from trying to push nonsense like this with regards to registering non-citizens to vote. That is because, you talked about Amendment 7. Amendment 7, if we had initiative petition reform, would have been the only amendment, constitutional provision, statewide ballot initiative, that would have passed the initiative petition reform. And so if we keep increasing our voter registration rolls and we're not cleaning them up, I mean, we don't know what we're dealing with, particularly in these cities like St. Louis City and even St. Louis County.
Yeah, we could have 150-year-old people on there and we're not even be able to verify.
We should probably run the Doge test through the voter rolls and see how many 500-year-old people that we have.
Well,
Civil War veterans.
One thing I'll say is that our new Secretary of State, Denny Hoskins, has been doing an excellent job. His office has been fantastic to work with. I know they're working on a number of things that are going to. They have some ideas that could greatly expand our ability to audit our voter rolls. So, I don't want to give away too much, but they are really working very hard to correct some of the problems that we have. And, if they pull some of these things off, I think that Missouri is going to be in a much better place.
I agree. I mean, I've talked to to Secretary Hoskins a little bit, and I really he's got some top-notch staff people there, so I'm really excited about that. Plus, the one thing I did want to ask if and I'm not sure if this would actually, we talked about the one Senate, one rule, one subject rule, but Representative Simmons has a bill over in the House, HB 864, I believe it is, that would require U.S. citizenship on driver's license. Is that something that could be potentially added to this as a way of, you got the voter registration, but then you also have the requirement of driver's license having proof of citizenship so that when you vote, it identifies. But I'm not sure if that would, because you're dealing with registration versus voting. I'm not sure if that goes there. I'm just curious if it could be added.
It's possible. I'd have to take a closer look at that. And it really, what it boils down to is how the bill is originally titled. So I don't have the bill in front of me. I'd have to see exactly how they worded that title. And anything that gets added in, assuming you want to do things the right way, anything added has to be germane to the title. So, and if anyone wants like a lesson on this, just tune into the Senate audio anytime Senator Mike Moon is talking. He is like one of the best people to go to talk about this exact subject. Probably, definitely the most principled person in regard to this aspect of policymaking. He will vote against the bill that he might agree with what it does, but he sets the bar very high. And so he is an excellent person to follow, and one of the best I've seen at ensuring that any policy he supports adheres to.
So what do you think? Both the Senate Bill 62 and 152 have been voted out of committee, I believe. Do you know where they are on the schedule as far as when they might come up for votes, perfection, I guess? And my hope is no amendments to them.
Yeah, I lucked out. I got a bill that was voted out today, actually completely clean, and it's that's almost just like, it makes it that much sweeter because that's so difficult to do these days. But yeah, particularly on a bill like these, Senate Bill 62 was added to the formal calendar last week, and so that one's actually pretty close. The
third is what it's showing.
Third, okay. Yep. So I am working very diligently to try to work out, because that's been a very labor-intensive one because there's so much history there and there's a lot of case law. I never thought when I was coming to the legislature that prepping the day before a committee hearing, I'd spend hours reading through 56 pages of a 2013 Supreme Court opinion and dissenting opinion. But I knew these are the things that people were going to try to get me on. I need to be equipped to combat all that. So there's a lot of case law history, and to ensure that this isn't challenged in court, you have to do one of two things. We don't want to end up with a bifurcated system like they have in Arizona because of the ongoing litigation on their law. And what I mean by that is they actually have the federal voter
Right.
registration form and a separate state registration form. So because of the litigation, and they were granted a stay on only part of that law, but not on the other. And so they were left with where you have one form you can fill out that only allows you to vote in federal elections, or you do the state form with your documentary proof of citizenship, and then you can vote in everything. That's not the kind of situation I would have put us in. That would be just, our elections are complicated and there's enough opportunities for fraud and things to happen. Complicating the system is not going to help with that. And so there are different ways we can avoid this. We can submit a request to the EAC that for state-specific ballot language on the federal form. Some states have done this with different aspects that just are specific to their state. You submit that request, and you need, I think there's a 4-person committee, and you'd have to have majority. So 3 of the 4 would have to vote to approve state-specific instructions, and I believe that would prevent any kind of litigation to try to block this. I don't think that would even be necessary considering the status of the Arizona case. Arizona's been going through this for a while. They had a partial stay that was granted before the last election cycle. They have ongoing litigation. They actually were denied by the Ninth Circuit Court. I'm a big surprise,
Right.
not exactly the court with the best track record, but that's good in this sense because now they can appeal it to the Supreme Court and finally get them to weigh in on this policy once and for all. In the 2013 case, they kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit. They said, the question at hand here is whether the Arizona law has merit and passes constitutional muster. But then they go on to say, but fortunately for us, we don't actually have to make that decision because there is another mechanism in their statutes that allow them to obtain this information. So they just kind of kicked it and decided not to rule. Bringing this back, we have opportunity now where Arizona can bring it back and finally force them to take a stand on this one way or another. That should give us clarity that would likely be settled before this law, if passed, would take effect. And so, in the meantime, I'm working on some language to where it would allow this to pass now, but prevent us falling into just one of those cumbersome, disorganized messes to where you have 2 separate forms running
Right.
parallel. We're not keeping up with the voter rolls like we need to be now, and going into a system like that is just going to make, when it is already a difficult task, that much harder.
Well, whatever we can do to help you get these 2, election integrity has obviously been one of our big issues over the last few years here with the photo ID, and then obviously with Amendment 7, and then now with these 2 bills that we've been really working behind the scenes to try to get the senators to support. And we're glad to see that they're coming up, and anything that we could do to help get those across the finish line, let us know. And, we're happy to help you, but we appreciate you. Is there anything else you want to close out with real quick here? I know we're coming up on the hour. We're actually past the hour time, so I wanted to let you get back to enjoying your family, and I appreciate your time.
Maybe something on IP reform coming up.
Yeah, you got Monday.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
I mentioned IP reform. So myself and I believe there's 3 or 4 other sponsors, we've been meeting, trying to all get on the same page as far as what it will look like. It will definitely be a concurrent majority process. Right now, I believe that we're leaning towards utilizing House districts versus congressional districts.
Oh, really? That's a change.
Yes. So that's something that we've I've kind of gone back and forth on. Just based on, initially, I preferred House districts. I think the more localized you have it, the better. Though, at least at first, the appetite for that wasn't there in the caucus. And so that's why we ended up going towards congressional districts. I think that we have an opportunity this year to where we can pursue it even more localized to where we have House districts. I think the more localized we are, the better representation of the will of Missouri as a whole is going to be reflected in those vote totals. And so that will be an aspect of it. Also, I think we're all in agreement that we're going to include a provision just like my foreign funding ban. I think we're all going to include a similar provision in the initiative petition reform as well, because that, I think, combined with the concurrent majority, that's going to eliminate a lot of the problems that we're having. So that won't go into as much detail. So it's still important we pass the statutory bill also, because I don't think anyone's looking to add another 30 pages to our Constitution. I think it's enough already. So that's gonna be more simpler, and then the details about how that will be implemented will be in my statutory bill.
Are you leaning towards, in your discussions, towards unified vote using concurrent majority on both legislative and citizen-led initiatives, or are you? Because I know your bill, I believe, does different for depending on which ones, and so I'm just curious if there's been discussions on that.
Yeah. My thinking for the way I filed it originally, my goal, I want to make the initiative petition process more reflective of a Republican form of government. A lot of people lose the fact that we don't actually live in a direct democracy. It's a constitutional republic. And so we moved to a concurrent majority system because, all these other parts of our government are already reflective of a constitutional republic. The legislature, just by nature, is a Republican form of government, because every area of the state, you have House districts that are divided up equally by population. Senate districts are divided up equally by population. And so each area, made up of equal number of voters approximately, gets to choose their representative to go there to the legislature to put forth policy. I wanted the next petition process to mirror that. So concurrent majority, as far as the ballot initiative, like we're already there as far as the legislature. Now, in conversations, there are some that think that that's a potential line of attack that opponents can use against us, saying like maybe the people that aren't as knowledgeable about the form of government that we're using currently might argue that, well, it's an unequal playing field, that if it's something that they just gather signatures on, it should have the same process as something that goes to the legislature. Well, as you guys know, it's not quite that simple as gathering signatures. You have to pass bills out of your committee, and then it has a perfection vote, and then it goes, yes, to have a third read vote, and then it has to go to the other chamber and start the process over entirely. And the House, you have even more committees. You got to vote it out of committee there. It's got to then go to a rules committee over there. It's got to pass out of a fiscal committee. It's got to pass by perfection vote on the House floor, and then pass by a third read vote. So the criteria isn't exactly equal right now. I wanted to just catch up the initial petition process to where the legislature already is. That being said, some of our conversations, there's some that are making the argument that, we also need this to pass. And are we opening ourselves up to an easier campaign to market against us by doing that? And, honestly, like I'm pretty open. I think that if it comes to rolling back provisions on Amendment 3, for instance, it doesn't really matter, because we live in a supermajority Republican state. If it's concurrent majority for things that pass through the legislature, personally, I don't really care either way, because if we have enough of a majority to send a supermajority to the Senate and House, then chances are concurrent majority is not going to really matter in the long run anyways. And if you look at how Amendment 3, the vote for that broke down, whether you're using congressional districts, House districts, that would not have passed under any of those provisions. So you have to assume that any fix or rolling back of that is going to be met with that same criteria, the same level of support.
Well,
that'll
go ahead,
actually
go ahead, Oscar.
that'll actually keep the 3 stronghold cities in check too, and give better buying power for the the regular rural areas, and give them a seat at the table as well.
mean, that's the reason why we supported it, because it's like it sets up like an electoral college system for a state with regards to ballot initiatives, so that basically St. Louis and Kansas City and Columbia dictate what goes into our Constitution. We don't, and the rural people that don't like this stuff, or even the county stuff, people that are in the conservative parts of St. Louis County. I mean, I'm actually kind of I'm happy that you guys are thinking about doing the state representative districts versus the congressional districts, because that's what we originally supported back last year. So that's kind of an interesting situation. And we heard some rumors about that, but I was like, I don't know. But yeah, we will definitely, unfortunately, you got to get these committees off Mondays so we can go down there and testify.
You're telling me I've been having far too many very long Sunday prep sessions because I've become somewhat of a regular in the local government and elections committee.
Yeah, I know. And it's like,
I joke when I go in there now, like, great to be back. My favorite.
well, it's
committee.
like 4:00. So who wants to come home at night, go down there after a long day. So, but, well, listen, we'll let you go. I really appreciate your time. And like I said, if there's anything, we'll definitely submit some testimony in support of all the initiative petitions to the elections committees on those, and encourage your members to do that also. But I really just, if there's anything we could do to help get Senate Bill 152 or 62 passed, please let us know. We're supporting those, and we want to make sure that those get passed this session. Again, thank you for joining with us, and have a good night, and we'll talk to you next week when we see you in Jeff City.
Sounds great, and appreciate everything you do, guys. Appreciate the opportunity to come on, and yeah, we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
I just want to thank everybody thank Senator Brown for joining us tonight. And I encourage listeners to go to our website at freedomprinciplemode.org and join us as members of our organization, support us, or even more importantly, go to Missouri82alliance.com and support the Missouri 82 Alliance and help us elect the next generation of conservative leaders in Missouri. And let's transform the Missouri House of Representatives to be more conservative. So thank you and have a good night.
Oh, hold on. Don't hit stop yet. So just want to highlight something, with Senator Brown had mentioned, on that last topic that we were talking about, just how we're a Republican form of government. And that was, I was extremely happy to hear him talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of legislators and a lot of people in government have been afraid to talk about those things, even if they, whether they knew it or not. But just want to commend him for bringing that forward here on our podcast. And I strongly encourage folks to search those things out and definitely talk about them openly as well. And Oscar from Show Me Sentinel. So thanks.
Yep.
Thanks
so
again.
Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.